November 9th, 1923, Berlin. It is still dark when the bakery opens. A school teacher named Anna waits in line with a leather satchel that once held lesson plans. Today it holds cash. Not savings, not wealth, just paper. By the time she reaches the counter, the price of bread has changed twice. She pays anyway. By the time she walks home, that same money would not buy a matchstick. Her income still arrives on schedule. Her poverty arrives faster. I start here because this is where the poverty loop reveals itself in its purest form. Income did not disappear for Anna. The system around her changed its rules. Her wages became irrelevant before she understood what was happening. I have watched this pattern repeat across decades and continents. Different currencies, different governments, same outcome. In the early 2000s, in Harare, a civil servant in Zimbabwe received a pay raise that looked generous on paper. By Friday, the raise could not cover bus fare. In 2017, in Caracas, a surgeon in Venezuela earned more in a month than his parents had in a year. He still skipped meals. In 2020, in Beirut, professionals in Lebanon watched lifetime savings evaporate behind bank doors that never reopened. Every one of them worked harder as things got worse. Every one of them believed income was the solution. That belief is the trap. I have survived enough cycles to tell you this calmly and without drama. Low income is rarely the root problem. It is the symptom. The disease is structural. The system is designed to extract time, convert it into depreciating claims, and keep you running faster just to stay in place. This is not conspiracy. It is mechanics. The poverty loop begins quietly. Wages are paid in currency units. Prices rise in real terms. At first, the gap is small. You compensate by working more hours. You delay consumption. You take on leverage, credit cards, personal loans. Buy now, pay later. The system applauds this behavior. It calls it participation. Then the second stage arrives: asset inflation. Housing, equities, education, healthcare. These do not rise because of productivity alone. They rise because currency supply expands faster than productive output. Those who already own assets benefit. Those who rely on income fall behind permanently. The third stage is psychological. People internalize failure. They believe they made bad choices. They blame themselves for structural outcomes. This is the most efficient part of the system. It requires no enforcement. People self-police their expectations downward. I saw this clearly after the collapse of the German mark. I saw it again decades later in Latin America. The details change. The loop does not. Income is linear, time-bound, finite. You trade hours for units of currency whose purchasing power you do not control. When the system needs adjustment, it does not renegotiate asset values downward. It adjusts currency upward. More units, less meaning. Your labor absorbs the loss. This is why people feel poorer even when their salaries rise. This is why productivity gains do not translate into security. This is why entire generations work harder than their parents and own less. The system is not broken. It is functioning exactly as designed. And here's the part most people miss. Escaping the poverty loop does not begin with earning more. That is the final step, not the first. Earning more without structural change only tightens the loop. Higher income often leads to higher fixed costs, greater exposure to the same currency risks, and deeper psychological dependence on the system's promises. I learned this lesson early, not from textbooks, but from watching brilliant, hardworking people get crushed by forces they did not know existed. People with advanced degrees, people with discipline, people who did everything right. They were paid. They were still poor. This has happened before. It follows stages: currency debasement, asset repricing, wage lag, debt normalization, psychological surrender. The loop closes. In later chapters, I will show you the assets that break this loop, the mechanisms that compound outside it, The decisions that quietly move you from income dependence to capital control, and the mistakes that lock people in place just as the exit becomes visible. But not yet. For now, understand this: poverty is not defined by how much you earn. It is defined by whether your income is trapped inside a system that constantly moves the goalposts. Most people never escape because they are taught to solve a structural problem with effort alone. Effort matters. Structure decides. Once you see the loop, you cannot unsee it. And once you understand how it has ended for millions before you, the urgency becomes calm, not frantic. The question is no longer whether the loop exists. It is whether you will step out before it tightens again. The first real escape from the poverty loop is not emotional. It is mechanical. I learned this lesson the hard way, watching people with rising incomes fall backward while others, earning less on paper, quietly moved ahead. The difference was not intelligence or effort. It was what their income turned into after it was earned. The first survival asset is productive ownership that compounds outside wage time. This is where most people misunderstand the word asset. They think in terms of price appreciation. I think in terms of replacement. What replaces your labor when the currency weakens? What produces value even if your paycheck stops? History answers this with brutal consistency. In post-World War I Germany, after the mark collapsed, salaried workers were wiped out. But mill owners, farmers, and small manufacturers survived, not because they were richer, but because they owned productive systems that society still needed. Food, heat, transport, tools. Their revenues repriced daily. Wages repriced monthly, if at all. The same pattern appeared in Zimbabwe. Teachers, doctors, and engineers earning millions of dollars a month starved. Street vendors selling fuel, grain, or repairs survived. Their incomes adjusted in real time. Their jobs were assets. In Venezuela, the middle class collapsed not because people stopped working, but because wages became ceremonial. Meanwhile, anyone who owned a car used for transport, a generator, a small import business, or agricultural land escaped the loop. Not comfortably, but structurally. This is the distinction that matters. Income that depends on permission versus income that depends on function. Wages require permission. From employers, from banks, from regulators, from the currency system. When stress arrives, permission is delayed, rationed, or revoked. Productive assets operate on function. If they solve a real problem, they are paid, directly or indirectly, regardless of monetary regime. This is why productivity, not prestige, is the first escape hatch. The mechanism is simple, but unforgiving. Currency expands faster than productivity. Asset prices rise faster than wages. Those who own productive systems ride the expansion. Those who sell time absorb it. People object here. They always do. They say productivity is risky, that businesses fail, that not everyone can own something, that labor is safer. History disagrees. Labor is only safe when currency is stable and asset inflation is contained. That is the exception, not the rule. Across long arcs of time, labor is the most fragile claim in the system. It is adjusted first because it is politically easiest. Another objection follows. What about education? Skills? Credentials? Education increases income. It does not break the loop unless it converts into ownership. Highly paid professionals often fall harder than laborers because their lifestyles lock them into fixed costs priced in inflating assets. They earn more and fall faster. I have seen this repeatedly. Surgeons driving imported cars in collapsing economies. Engineers with foreign degrees queuing for currency withdrawals. Their skills were real. Their income structure was fatal. Ownership does not mean large factories or public companies. It means control over cash flow that is not tied to hours worked. Small businesses. Rental property that cash flows conservatively. Agricultural output. Energy production. Logistics. repair services, even intellectual property that earns while you sleep. These are not glamorous, they are durable. The poverty loop feeds on linearity. You work, you are paid. The currency loses value, you repeat. Productive assets bend time. They work when you don't. They reprice when the system shifts. This is why asset owners feel inflation differently. Prices rise, but so do revenues. The loop loosens. There are failures here too, and they matter. Debt-heavy ownership fails and collapses. Over-leveraged assets are seized. Businesses dependent on imported inputs without pricing power collapse. The system punishes fragility brutally. Survivable ownership shares three traits: low leverage, essential output, and pricing flexibility. I do not mean passive investing narratives sold on social media. I mean structures that survive when banks close early, when currency controls appear, when contracts are rewritten. This is not ideology, it is observation. When people ask me how to escape low income, I tell them something they do not want to hear. Earning more is optional. Owning something productive is not. Income is how you enter the system. Ownership is how you exit the loop. Later, I will show you how this asset class combines with others to form a defensive architecture. I will show you how people who understood this survived currency resets without heroics or luck. For now, understand this. The first crack in the poverty loop appears the moment even a small portion of your life stops being priced by the hour and starts being priced by output. That is where escape begins. By the time people recognize that income alone cannot save them, the system has already moved into its most deceptive phase. This is where the second and third escape assets matter, because this is where illusion replaces reality. I have lived through this stage more than once. It is the moment when numbers look larger, portfolios appear healthier, and yet purchasing power is quietly being destroyed. People think they are getting richer. They are, in fact, being priced out. The second survival asset is hard monetary anchors that exist outside the banking promise. History is unambiguous here. After the collapse of the German mark, gold did not go up in value. The currency went down. The same ounce of gold that bought a suit before hyperinflation bought a building after. Gold holders did not feel clever. They felt unchanged. Everyone else felt poor. In Zimbabwe, those who held physical gold, foreign currency, or tradable commodities survived the transition from millions to trillions with their purchasing power intact. Bank balances were erased. Pension statements became fiction. Hard monetary anchors simply waited. In Venezuela, gold jewelry, US dollars, and even cartons of cigarettes became parallel money. The bolivar still existed. It just stopped functioning. Those with monetary anchors moved through the economy. Those without were trapped inside it. This asset survives because it does not require trust. It does not require a counterparty to honor a promise. It is not someone else's liability. When confidence breaks, trust-based instruments fail first. Anchors do not. People object to this asset emotionally. They say it does not produce income. They say it just sits there. They say it is old-fashioned. They misunderstand its role. Hard monetary anchors are not growth assets. They are time bridges. They allow you to move purchasing power from one regime to the next without being diluted. They give you the patience to wait while others are forced to sell productive assets at generational lows. Every collapse transfers ownership, not from rich to poor, but from forced sellers to patient holders. Which brings us to the third survival asset: optionality under stress. This is the most misunderstood concept in finance, and the most powerful. Optionality is not leverage. Leverage is fragility disguised as confidence. Optionality is the ability to act when others cannot. I saw this clearly in Argentina during repeated currency crises. Those who held liquid foreign assets, hard money, or portable wealth were not trying to survive day to day. They were waiting for property to be dumped at fractions of replacement cost, waiting for businesses to be sold for cash flow, not valuations, waiting for panic. The illusion most people fall for is nominal explosion. Asset prices rise in currency terms. Salaries double. Portfolios triple, but real purchasing power collapses. I watched people celebrate stock market gains in collapsing currencies while their rent, food, and fuel rose faster. They felt wealthier. They were poorer. Optionality cuts through this illusion. When you hold assets that are liquid, portable, and trusted across borders, you are not betting on appreciation. You are positioning for relative advantage. You can exchange stability for distress. You can convert patience into ownership. This is who survives versus who gets wiped out. Those wiped out are fully invested in the system's promises, pensions, domestic bonds, fixed wages, leveraged real estate, long-duration claims. Their wealth is trapped inside institutions that rewrite rules during stress. Those who survive hold a mix of productive ownership, hard anchors, and optionality. They do not need to predict timing. They only need to remain solvent longer than the system remains stable. This is the mid-cycle turning point. Most viewers will feel uncomfortable here, because this is where effort stops being the solution. This is where structure dominates. People ask me, how much should I allocate? That question comes too early. Allocation without understanding is just another loop. What matters is that some portion of your wealth exists outside the mechanisms that enforce poverty. In every collapse I have studied, the winners were not the boldest or the loudest. They were the quietest. They did not argue with the system. They stepped aside from it. The illusion of progress is strongest just before the break. That is when incomes rise, markets rally, and optimism peaks. That is also when optionality is cheapest. This is where most people miss it. In the next chapter, I will take you into the final phase. What happens when banks freeze, payment systems fail, and formal markets stop clearing. I will show you what still works, what goes to zero overnight, and the psychological mistakes that destroy people even after they are warned. This is where survival stops being theoretical. There is a moment in every systemic collapse when theory ends. It does not arrive with a headline. It arrives with a door that does not open. I remember Barrow, late 2019. Not from a chart, but from conversations. Middle-class depositors standing calmly in front of banks that had temporarily adjusted hours. ATMs still worked. Transfers were delayed. No one used the word freeze. Then one morning, withdrawals were capped. Days later, they were denied. The currency still existed. The accounts still showed balances. But money, as a usable tool, was gone. This is the phase where the poverty loop becomes a trap. When banks freeze, income stops mattering almost entirely. Wages credited to inaccessible accounts are ceremonial. Pensions are promises without delivery. Digital balances become numbers on a screen disconnected from survival. This has happened before, repeatedly. In Lebanon, the middle class learned in real time that deposits were unsecured loans to the banking system. In Argentina, during the Corralito, people with full employment and savings could not pay rent or buy food. In Venezuela, payment rails failed so often that entire neighborhoods reverted to cash, barter, or foreign currency almost overnight. This is where tactical assets matter, not investment assets, survival assets. The first is transactional liquidity outside the formal system, cash in a usable form. Not excessive, not symbolic, enough to transact when networks fail. In every collapse, there is a window where physical settlement regains value because trust evaporates faster than infrastructure adapts. People always dismiss this as primitive, until they need it. The second is substitution goods, items that replace something essential when the official version becomes unavailable or unaffordable. Fuel substitutes. Food substitutes, energy substitutes. In Zimbabwe, cooking oils, soap, and batteries became currency. In Venezuela, antibiotics, spare parts, and generators were wealth. These are not stores of value in normal times. In stress, they become clearing mechanisms. The third is local productive capability. skills and tools that produce immediate utility without reliance on supply chains, repair, transport, food production, power generation. In collapses, specialization collapses backward. Generalists survive. Those who can fix, grow, move, or secure things regain agency, while others wait for systems that no longer function. This is where the illusion of modern finance dies. Markets stop clearing. Prices become indicative, not executable. Insurance contracts fail quietly. Counterparties invoke force majeure. Regulators suspend rules. None of this is malicious. It is arithmetic under stress. The zero list emerges here. Long-duration bonds go to zero in real terms. Pensions tied to domestic currency become unrecoverable. Highly leveraged real estate collapses as credit disappears. Equity claims dependent on imported inputs without pricing power vanish. Digital-only wealth without access paths becomes trapped. People do not lose everything at once. They lose access first, then value, then time. The most destructive losses in this phase are psychological. The first mistake is denial. People wait for normal hours to resume, for limits to be lifted, for authorities to reassure them. Time passes. Options close. The second mistake is liquidation at the worst possible moment. Forced sales to meet short-term needs destroy generational capital. I have seen families sell productive land to buy months of consumption because they lacked transactional liquidity. They survived the year and lost the decade. The third mistake is social signaling. Panic purchases, visible hoarding, loud complaints. These attract attention at precisely the wrong time. In stress systems, visibility is risk. Those who navigate this phase successfully do not fight the system. They route around it. They reduce dependency on centralized rails. They substitute function for form. They trade convenience for resilience. They act early and quietly. This is where prior chapters converge. Productive ownership generates utility. Hard monetary anchors preserve optionality. Liquidity enables action. Together, they prevent desperation. Most people think collapse is fast. It is not. It is uneven. Some days nothing happens. Then everything does. The danger is not speed. It is sequencing. If you wait until banks freeze to prepare, you are already too late. In the final chapter, I will assemble everything into a coherent structure. Not a fantasy portfolio, but a survivable architecture. I will address the skeptics who say this time is different. I will explain how to think about risk without paralysis, and I will return to the opening scene, because the end always explains the beginning. This is where understanding becomes responsibility. We end where we began. Berlin, winter 1923. Not in the bakery this time, but months later. The currency reset has arrived. A new unit replaces the old. Wages are recalibrated. Prices stabilize. Newspapers declare the crisis over. For most people, it is already too late. The damage was not the collapse. It was what happened during the collapse, while they waited for normal to return. This is the final lesson of the poverty loop. The system always survives. The people inside it do not always survive intact. I have spent my career studying what remains standing after monetary stress. Not what looks good on paper, but what actually works when incentives break and promises are rewritten. The full structure is not complex. It is uncomfortable because it rejects the myths people are taught. Here is the architecture, calmly and without drama. First, liquidity with access. Not all liquidity, accessible liquidity. Assets you can actually use under stress, not just admire on a statement. This is what buys time. Time prevents forced decisions. Forced decisions destroy wealth faster than any market crash. Second, productive control. Something that produces value independent of employment and permission, not speculative ownership. Operational ownership. The ability to convert effort, tools, or capital into goods or services people cannot delay consuming. This is what breaks income dependence permanently. Third, hard monetary anchors. Assets that do not require belief in institutions to function. These are not there to make you rich. They are there to ensure you are not wiped out before opportunity arrives. They are insurance against the system's need to reset itself. Fourth, optionality under stress. This is the reward for discipline. When others are selling because they must, you can wait. When assets are mispriced because credit is gone, you can act. Optionality is not aggression, it is patience with teeth. This structure is not about predicting collapse. It is about being indifferent to its timing. Now let me address the skeptic directly. What if nothing happens? Then you still own productive assets. You still have liquidity. You still have optionality. You still avoided leverage that destroys lives quietly. The cost of preparedness is low. The cost of denial is total. What if authorities intervene? They always do. And every intervention redistributes wealth. Liquidity injections protect debtors and asset owners. Currency debasement penalizes wage earners and savers. Controls trap those who waited. Interventions do not remove risk, they move it. What if this time is different? Every collapse believes it is. That belief is part of the mechanism. The instruments change, the incentives do not. Debt expands faster than productivity. Currency absorbs the gap. Time-based earners pay the price. Risk management at this level is not about avoiding loss. It is about avoiding ruin. Ruin is permanent. Drawdowns are recoverable. The system recovers. Individuals often do not. This is why I never optimize for maximum return. I optimize for survival with upside. That is how you compound across decades, instead of peaking once and disappearing. Now return, one last time, to that woman in Berlin. She did not fail because she was lazy or uninformed. She failed because she trusted income inside a system that was structurally changing faster than she could react. The tragedy was not ignorance, it was timing. Those who escaped did not do so by working harder. They stepped outside the loop before it closed, quietly, early, without permission. That is the real escape from low income. Not a raise, not a side hustle, not a motivational slogan. A structural shift away from dependence on depreciating promises toward control, optionality, and resilience. The system is not designed to make you poor out of malice. It is designed to function. Poverty is a byproduct of how adjustment occurs. Once you accept that, emotion leaves the equation. You do not need to fight the system. You need to stop standing directly underneath it when it shifts. This has happened before. It will happen again. The only variable is who understands the loop in time. That understanding is now yours.